The master bathroom door of my custom-built farmhouse shook under the weight of a frantic shoulder, sounding like a trapped animal sensing the end. Inside, the water sloshed violently against porcelain, a frantic, rhythmic sound that cut through the thick clouds of steam. Then I heard it. My sister Brooke's voice, high, thin, and absolutely panicked, shredded the silence. "Stop! Stop! She's right there!" she shrieked. My husband, Aaron, didn't stop. He pounded his fist against the wood again, his voice barking out that same commanding tone he used when he expected the entire world to bow to his will. "Open this door right now, Kayla!" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for a tissue. I didn't even allow my pupils to dilate. In my world of high-level finance, panic is just a lack of preparation, and I was perfectly prepared. I simply reached out and turned the heavy brass deadbolt until it clicked, a sound so dry and so final it felt like closing a bank vault for the last time. I laid my palm flat against the cold surface of the door, feeling the vibration of their desperation, and for the first time in years, I realized that I held all the equity. This wasn't a marriage failing, it was an audit reaching its inevitable conclusion. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I pivoted away from the door, the sound of Aaron's demands fading into white noise. The hallway of our Northern Virginia farmhouse was dim, the air heavy with a floral perfume that carried a higher price tag than Brooke's supposed income could ever justify. I retrieved my phone from the marble kitchen island and scrolled until I found Jackson's name, my brother-in-law, an architect whose life was built on structural integrity. When he answered, my pulse remained as flat as a treasury bond. "Ja-R." "Jackson," I said, my voice as steady as an automated ticker tape. "You need to be at my house in 5 minutes. Aaron and Brooke are currently sharing the master bathtub." The silence that followed was a physical weight. I didn't offer a single adjective to soften the blow. I just studied my reflection in the darkened window, seeing a woman who had finally stopped subsidizing her own betrayal. Jackson didn't ask for evidence. He simply whispered, 5 minutes, and hung up. Standing in the quiet, the house felt hollowed out, as if the foundation had been liquidated while I was at the office. I realized then that I had been the silent engine of this entire operation. For a decade, I was the senior financial analyst who balanced the ledgers so everyone else could live in the black. I was the one who underwrote Aaron's real estate broker license and quietly absorbed the losses from Brooke's boutique design business every time her accounts went into the red. My empathy had been a high-interest loan they had defaulted on for years, treating my capital like a gift and my presence like a footnote. Ja-R. I looked at the mahogany cabinets and the professional-grade range, the physical assets of a life I had financed to protect people who were currently devaluing me in the next room. My restraint over the years wasn't a lack of spirit, it was a survival strategy. I grew up in a household where volatility was the baseline, and being the reliable one was the only way to mitigate the risk. It was a psychological house of glass invisible chains that taught me to value their ego over my own reality. But as the deadbolt held firm, the ledger finally balanced. I wasn't the victim anymore, I was the liquidator. I opened my laptop and navigated to our joint future fund. I didn't feel a tremor as I hit the login screen. I just hit refresh, watching for the first withdrawal from the man who was about to realize that his credit had just been revoked. Ja-R. The rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of the oversight committee. It wasn't just Jackson's sedan. The sharp, staccato pulse of blue and red emergency lights painted the living room walls in shades of authority. Jackson hadn't come alone. He had brought Sheriff Gary, a man who had known our family since I was 6 and whose presence transformed a domestic dispute into a matter of public record. I opened the front door before the first knock could land. Jackson's face looked like it had been carved from granite. His jaw locked. Gary didn't offer a greeting. He simply looked at the deadbolt, still securing the hallway door. "Is the situation contained?" Jackson asked, his voice sounding like it was filtered through a mile of lead. I nodded and surrendered the key. As he turned the lock, the click echoed through the foyer like a gavel hitting a bench. The door swung open, and a pressurized wave of humid, steam-thick air spilled into the hall. Aaron appeared first, draped in my favorite silk robe, his hair damp and his eyes darting across the room, already attempting to calculate the minimum viable lie. Behind him, Brooke gripped a towel against her skin, her expensive mascara running in dark, jagged lines down her cheeks. Aaron tried to summon his sales floor charm, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leave. "Jackson, man, this is a massive misunderstanding," he started, but the words evaporated the moment he saw Gary's badge. The sheriff didn't engage in small talk. He raised his phone and began a systematic documentation of the scene, the robe, the towel, the steam, and the digital timestamp. I didn't demand an explanation. I didn't ask for remorse. I just pointed a single, steady finger toward the exit. "Out," I said, my tone cold and non-negotiable. "Both of you." Aaron's mask of charm disintegrated into a snarl. "You have no right to evict me from my own property, Kayla," he snapped. He believed that his signature on the original deed gave him permanent leverage, but he was unaware that I had spent the last quarter diversifying my legal position. As they scrambled to collect their essentials under the sheriff's observation, my phone hummed with a notification. A pending transfer alert. Aaron glanced at my screen, and a thin, predatory smile creased his face. "Pay attention," he hissed as he moved toward the door, leaning in close enough for me to smell the steam on his skin. "Infidelity isn't a legal grounds for asset seizure in this state. Half of this house is mine, and I've spent months ensuring that you'll walk away with the crumbs." He still thought intimidation was a viable currency. But as the door slammed shut, I didn't feel the sting of his threat. I felt the security of a closed system. Aaron's power was a leveraged buyout he'd funded with my account, and the market was finally correcting itself. The morning following the breach, the farmhouse was finally silent. The air cleared of his presence. I didn't waste the daylight mourning over wedding albums. I spent it in a small, wood-paneled law office 2 blocks from the courthouse. My attorney, a woman who looked like she had cross-examined the devil and won, sat across from me. She didn't ask about the emotional fallout, she asked for the bank statements. I presented the alerts from my phone. Aaron had attempted to liquidate the future fund while the steam was still rising from the bathtub. It was the predictable reflex of a man who mistook access for ownership. "In this office, we don't play emotionally, we play mathematically," she said, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad with surgical precision. Following her counsel, I didn't retaliate by draining the shared accounts, which would have been a tactical error. Instead, I established a new private checking account for all subsequent income. We filed for an immediate temporary order for exclusive use of the residence and an injunction against any non-essential asset movements. While the legal machinery began to grind, I performed a forensic audit of our last 3 years. I uncovered a secret credit card Aaron had opened 90 days prior, which now carried a balance of $11,520. The transaction history provided a detailed map of his betrayal luxury suites, 5-star dinners, and a $3,360 jewelry invoice for a shop within walking distance of Brooke's studio. I wasn't looking at a marriage, I was looking at a long-term embezzlement scheme where I was the primary investor. The social pressure began at 12 o'clock. My mother called, her voice dripping with the kind of manipulative grace that prioritizes the family's image over the daughter's safety. "Family is a sacred bond, Kayla," she lectured, demanding that I be the bigger person and keep our business private. I terminated the call without a word. I understood now that Aaron's perceived authority was a hollow shell, an illusion of success that existed only as long as I continued to fund it. Once the cash flow stopped, his fortress was just a stack of unpaid bills and forged promises. I wasn't just filing for divorce, I was executing a hostile takeover of my own life. "Zai." The mediation suite was sterile. a room designed for the cold distribution of things. Aaron arrived as if he were closing the largest commercial deal of the year, wearing a tailored suit and a smugness that suggested he had already spent the settlement money. He sat opposite me and pushed a thick folder across the table, his voice oozing a calculated, reasonable tone. "I'm prepared to be generous, Kayla. You can keep the furniture and the appliances," he said, as if giving me the objects I had already paid for was an act of charity. My attorney didn't even acknowledge his offer. She simply opened a folder of her own and extracted a single, high-resolution scan that caused his posture to collapse. "Let's discuss the inheritance fund and the suspicious activity in your sister-in-law's business accounts," she said, her voice like a scalpel. She explained that my earlier concession regarding the household goods was merely a procedural hook to trigger a mandatory, full-scale financial discovery. Under that court-ordered microscope, we had found the missing $40,000 from my private inheritance. Aaron began to stammer an excuse about reinvesting for our future, but my attorney stopped him by sliding a zoomed-in copy of the withdrawal slip across the table. The signature at the bottom was a shaky, amateurish attempt to mimic my handwriting. "This isn't a reinvestment, Aaron. This is a signature mismatch on a high-value withdrawal. In this jurisdiction, that's a felony-level forgery," she stated, her eyes locked on his. The room became an airless vacuum. I watched the reality set in the rope I had allowed him to take wasn't a lifeline, it was the evidence for his own indictment. The proceedings had transitioned from a division of property to a criminal referral. Aaron's face underwent a total transformation. The confidence drained away, replaced by the raw, panicked stare of a man who realized his glass fortress wasn't just breaking. It was being demolished by the very truth he thought he could hide. The farmhouse stayed quiet for days after the mediation, though the echoes of Aaron's desperate excuses seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. The legal process was no longer a negotiation, it was a reckoning. Winter had firmly gripped the Northern Virginia hills, a perfect mirror for the cold, unyielding clarity that had replaced my former life. The knock on the door came just as the sun was disappearing. I didn't need to check the security feed to identify the visitor. Brooke stood on the porch, her designer coat dusted with a thin layer of snow, her face swollen and unrecognizably small. The arrogance she had carried like a designer accessory had been stripped away, leaving only the wreckage of her choices. "Kayla, please," she sobbed the moment the door opened. "The bank has frozen all my business assets. They're saying Aaron used your inheritance as collateral for my loans. They're calling it a coordinated fraud." She reached out for my hand, but I stepped back into the sterile light of the hallway. "Mom says Aaron is looking at 5 to 10 years for the forgery. If you don't drop the charges, we'll lose everything. Please, do it for the family." I looked at her, and for a fleeting second, I felt a ghost of the sisterhood we once shared, not a desire to help, but a cold acknowledgement of the person she used to be before greed took over. Then I envisioned the jewelry receipt for $3,360. I remembered her laughter behind that locked door while I was working a 12-hour shift to maintain the roof over her head. I didn't offer a rebuttal. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached for a document on the foyer table and handed it to her. It was a copy of the finalized criminal referral and the official eviction notice for the property. I already chose the family I wanted to protect. "Brooke," I said, my voice as flat as a heart rate monitor after the pings stop. "I chose me. I'm not the silent partner in your destruction anymore." She stared at the legal seal on the paper, finally realizing that an apology is just noise when the debt is this high. It wasn't a conversation, it was a closing statement. "But where am I supposed to go?" she whispered into the wind. "That sounds like a question for a sister," I replied. "And you liquidated that relationship months ago." I closed the door for the final time on my biological family, the click of the latch sounding like the end of a long, expensive trial. The silence that followed wasn't lonely, it was a clean slate. I had finally stopped paying for a life that wasn't mine. The transfer of the farmhouse was completed on a bright, unforgiving spring morning. I didn't feel a single regret as I turned the keys over to the new owners. The house was just an assembly of materials. The true asset was the $48,000 in recovered restitution I had clawed back through the courts. I moved to a city where no one knew my maiden name, leaving behind the weight of being the family's useful daughter. I utilized the recovered funds to establish the Silent Sentinel Foundation, a specialized mentorship program designed for financial literacy. I wanted to ensure that other responsible ones, the people who carry the world on their shoulders, learned how to build their lives out of legal certainty instead of blind trust. This wasn't just a career shift. It was my way of ensuring those invisible chains never found a new set of wrists. I often reflect on the people who told me to be sensible, which I now recognize was just code for staying silent so we don't have to change. To anyone currently listening who feels like they are living in a house of mirrors, being told their value is a variable based on someone else's mood, you are not the problem. You are not selfish for auditing your own life. Sometimes the most moral thing you can do is withdraw your investment from people who only see you as a resource. I'm sitting on my new porch now, watching the sun rise over the marsh. The light is sharp, honest, and for the first time in 32 years, it isn't reflecting off someone else's lies. I've learned that when you provide your own light, you don't need a fortress to feel safe. If you've ever had to choose your own future over a family that only valued your utility, share your journey in the comments. Your strength might be the blueprint someone else is looking for today. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and the power of the truth.